Well, the Word of God is really always so special to us as a church. And as we open ourselves to the Word of God, it really is a moment for us to meet Jesus very personally. And both the Old Testament reading of Sirach and St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, and then the Gospel also, really begins to tell us how we are called to live as disciples of Jesus Christ, how we are called to follow Him, and how we are called to meet Him in a real way in our lives. I really have been always touched by St. Paul especially, and in his letter to the Corinthians he quotes the Old Testament, but it talks about death, and death, where is your sting? In other words, all of us, we know, are going to die in our human flesh. But St. Paul is telling us there's more, much more actually. And that actually needs to be the center of our lives. So when we begin to meet Jesus in all of our life moments, it's really meant for us to meet Him first as Jesus who gave His life for us. Jesus who gave His life for me and for you. That's a personal moment. But it's also meant to be more than that. I think I shared with you last time I was here when I was named your bishop over 5 years ago now. And right before I was to be ordained your bishop, I got sick. And I was in the hospital for a full month before I got here. And I found myself in the hospital getting not stronger and stronger, but weaker and weaker physically. And so it became really a moment for me personally to meet Jesus in the suffering. Meet Jesus in the suffering. And that's not unlike what happens to us in our lives. This was just a little more extreme. And it got to a point where in prayer, I was simply asking the Lord, okay, you decide. You called me to be the bishop of the Diocese of Biloxi, but if you want me there, you have to keep me on this side of the grass. Otherwise, pick somebody else, and I'm coming home. In the end, that's really what it becomes for us. In absolute humility, in the weakness of our bodies, in the weakness of being human, but to meet the glory of the Lord, to meet Jesus risen from the dead, that changes everything. And of course, obviously, he answered that prayer and said, no, you're not getting out of this. You're going to be the fourth bishop of Biloxi. Here we go. And that's been a blessing. But it was also an invitation to me to accept the call in true humility and in this flesh here. And in a similar way, Jesus does the same thing for each of us. He says to us in the moments of difficulty, in the moments of trial, in the moments of struggle, I'm there with you first. And especially if it's a moment of deep suffering, whatever it may be, I'm there with you, and I know what it feels like. That's why I died on the cross for you. That's why He died on the cross for me. He knew what it was like to be in the hospital for a month. And that moment is meant to be the moment in which it all changes into a moment of the resurrection. Because if we let Him in, we let His grace really touch us, it changes. And it becomes a resurrection moment. And once the resurrection has touched something, it's never the same. Trust me. Never the same. It becomes a moment of not just sadness and sorrow and shame and guilt, but it becomes a moment of glory, of grace, of risen from the dead, of sharing in the life of God forever. Forever. That's actually what the hospital stay became for me. A moment of the resurrection. Coming coming out of the cross, yes, but a moment of resurrection. And that's really who he calls us to be, people of the resurrection. And it changes everything, it really does, if you let him touch that moment. So in our family difficulties, or our personal challenges, or our struggles we may have at school or work, whatever may be going on, those are moments in which Jesus calls us through the cross into the resurrection. And thus, St. Paul could say, death, where is your sting? It's gone. Because we know we shall rise with him forever, all of us who are baptized in Jesus. So our English-speaking folks, if you just pause for a moment, I'm going to give a summary in Spanish, and I promise it's going to be quick. Right? So, para los que hablan español, un sumario de la homilía es que cada momento cuando recibimos el sacramento del bautismo es el momento en que recibimos la promesa de la vida eterna. Entonces en la vida hay dificultades, problemas, cosas como así, pero en realidad tenemos que ser gente de la resurrección de Cristo, en que encontramos a nuestro Señor Jesucristo en nuestras vidas, en nuestras familias, en nuestro trabajo o en la escuela, como quiera. Jesucristo está presente con nosotros. Y de ser gente de la resurrección, toda la vida está cambiada. Toda la vida está cambiada. Entonces rezamos para esa gracia durante esta misa. How about that for a quick summary? Let's stand.